Today, I will be interviewing Victoria Martz, who is running for District 55 in Indiana. She's running for the Indiana State House. And if you don't know who I am, hi, my name's Brianna. I'm also known as the Recovered Republican. To hit that follow button and like and share videos you see to get them out to more people.
So my name is Victoria Martz. I currently work as an attorney. I've been an attorney for 6 years now. I'm in my 7th year of practice. I actually started off as a deputy prosecutor with Marion County in Indianapolis, Indiana, because part of what really motivated me to go into law, amongst other things, was I felt it would be very useful of my abilities as somebody who enjoys public speaking to use my voice in the courtroom to speak up for people who are violent crime victims and victims of like just the worst crimes that we see in society. That's something that I still would love to put my voice into at some point in time, but I actually ended up leaving that line of work after being there for about a year and a half in my role as an attorney, because the types of cases that I was working on dealt very heavily with substance possession and substance use cases. And in my line of work, when you're a deputy prosecutor on those cases, you really are just crafting plea agreement offers that fit a person's criminal history and their socioeconomic status. And I had a really hard time getting people within my own office to understand like just the intricacies of human existence outside of what one might experience if they come from a standard middle class family or above socioeconomic status wise. And it was really frustrating, and I just didn't feel like I was actually helping effectuate justice. And I went to law school because I wanted to pursue just ends for all people. So that's what really motivated me to get on this criminal defense side of cases. And that's actually a lot of the same type of cases that I'm working on now. But now that I'm on the criminal defense side of things, I'm getting people connected with resources. I'm getting them connected with tools that they need to work on if they are charged with a substance related crime and they truly are experiencing a substance abuse issue. We're getting them connected with the services that they need to actually accomplish rehabilitation. And I'm doing everything I can to keep people out of jail, because I genuinely don't see jail as the way to treating substance abuse issues. It's literally, it just puts a pause on it. It's a pause until they get out of jail. And if you haven't connected them with the services they needed to cope with those underlying issues, which usually have to do with access to housing, access to healthcare, and access to mental health treatment, they're going to go back to abusing those substances as soon as that permanent pause that was enforced by the law is taken off of them. So that's why I'm on this side of cases, and I really love the work that I do here. So I actually come from a really big family. I have 5 siblings. They're all my full-blood siblings. My family was very highly religious, and we actually grew up fairly conservative too. So I grew up mainly in this area out here that's called Milan, Indiana. It's a small town. I grew up in an even smaller town. It's actually called Pierceville, Indiana, which is just noted by a post office off of the country road. You say, yeah, I live by that post office. That's my town back there. It's not a town. It's like 10 houses scattered across the countryside. So I grew up out there on a small family farm where we grew about 2 acres, and we grew all kinds of produce like tomatoes, asparagus, strawberries, lettuce, peppers. It was a really cool experience. I also got to raise chickens, and they are one of my favorite animals because of this. So that was kind of my growing up time. And I honestly grew up in all kinds of places because I was born in Virginia, lived there till I was like 5. I actually lived in Michigan from 5 till I was about 9, and then we moved to Indiana. So I've lived in a couple different places, but I call Batesville and Milan, Indiana my home because that's where I lived the longest period. And before I was a lawyer, I worked all kinds of jobs. So the first job that I worked before like getting an actual paid job, I was taking memorials. I don't know if you know what that is, but it's like when somebody passes away and they're having like visitation at the funeral home, people will come in and they'll say, hey, I want to give some money to the family or give some money to this cause. And so I would take down just who they were donating to and how much they donated. And that was my job, was taking those memorials. And then I've worked in a lot of other jobs since then. I was a librarian for a number of years, student librarian. So you actually have to get a degree to be a real librarian, but I did not do that. I was a student volunteer at the libraries, and then I also did delivery services. So I did like pizza delivery, and then I did a delivery service that's like, oh my goodness, what's it called? That one where you can pick up from any restaurant and get food, basically.
Like DoorDash?
Yes, DoorDash. Thank you. I did like a DoorDash type job. I worked as a server. So I've gotten a couple different job experiences out here, and those honestly are all big parts. Like, there's so many pieces over my life that have motivated me to do this run for office. It's just been seeing a lot of injustices and a lot of discrimination along the way in my life. But my biggest driving force right now is I need to get into office, and I need to get other people like me running for office and into office as well, for my daughter and for everybody else's kids out there who are growing up in this world right now. I remember being a kid, and you probably remember this too. I think it even stands out more with yesterday being 9/11. Just the world that we grew up in. We saw a lot of crazy things happen. We studied history books where we read about some of the most horrendous crimes against humanity that have happened in history. And we wondered, like, why didn't people stop this sooner? Why didn't anybody stand up in big ways and stand against this? And that really motivates me, is I don't want my daughter to grow up and wonder, why was my mom just acting like everything was fine while all of this stuff was going on? It's not fine. There's a lot of messed up stuff happening out there right now. And I want my daughter to know, and everybody's kids to know, that their parents' generation stood up and stood against it in every way we possibly could.
Amazing. I love that. I think it's really powerful when people have a very personal reason. So I love that you do. How old is your daughter? I have to know.
She's 2.5. She's gonna be 3 in December, and
Oh,
she is so freaking hilarious. Oh my God.
you tell me about what you're running for, what District 55 encompasses.
Okay, sure. So I'll start off with the basics of what District 55 encompasses. So out here in rural District 55, my major cities are Connorsville, Indiana, Brookville, Indiana, Batesville, Indiana, and Liberty, Indiana. So my district covers all of Franklin, Fayette, and Union counties, and then small slivers of Ripley, Decatur, and Rush counties. So I am very keyed in on this issue of gerrymandering, because our district is clearly very heavily gerrymandered, because why else would it make any sense to cut us 6 counties into one district here in such an obscure way? So we've got a very unique cutout here, but for my benefit, I get to run for District 55 because I am in that little sliver of Ripley County. But I would love to see a future where gerrymandering isn't happening in this way, where we are cutting districts, counties into pieces. I know up in Allen County, Indiana, I think I heard that there's a district up there that is cut so precisely that it goes through a single apartment complex, where people living in this apartment complex could all end up in different districts because their area has been so heavily gerrymandered. So it's a serious issue, and I think that when we think about drawing lines for political party divisions, we really should be drawing those lines in a way that makes sense for equal distribution of the population and running along with actual naturally occurring borders, not cutting into counties, cutting them up into tiny pieces like this. But I digress.
You mentioned that you grew up very conservative. So does that mean that you were always a Democrat or no?
No, actually, so I like, if I was actually engaged in a conversation with somebody and taking a stance, I think somebody who actually understood politics maybe would say I leaned Democrat already. But because my parents were so conservative, they they actually were really great politically engaged people. So I remember from being like a 5-year-old kid, my mom bringing me with her when she went to vote and her going behind the curtain, and they closed the little curtain and did their little secret thing. And then they came out while I was like just this little kid. And it really got me interested in the political process from a young age. But I do remember she and my dad were both very conservative people. And I don't like remember any specific issues or stances they took specifically in my mind, but I just remember on election days we would have those maps, and you had your blue crayon and your red crayon, and you colored in the states as they started to call which state went to which presidential candidate. And I remember we were always the most excited for the red ones, and that's just not who I am now. But that's how I know that as a young kid, that was how I politically aligned. And I think a lot of that came from that's how my parents politically aligned. And I, just like any kid, believed that my parents, they were very clear-minded individuals. They saw the world in a way that I understood, and I wanted to be just like them. And I am just like them in a lot of great ways that I'm super proud of. And what I think is really interesting now is that I don't think either one of my parents would identify themselves either as these very conservative people anymore as well. And I think a big part of that is because we've seen such a shift in the stances you have to take on issues to align with a given political party in this day and age. We've just seen a big shift from, maybe all being more centered on the axis to being more far shifted to the right. So, people who might just have popular anti-establishment, anti-elite ideas were being labeled things like far left people just because we're standing by human rights and actually holding people accountable and to the same standards, while the rest of the spectrum is seemingly moved very far to the right. But that's more like a big issue topic. I don't know too much about it, but that's just kind of my perceptions.
Yeah, no. So, how long would you say you've identified as a Democrat then?
I would say I've identified as a Democrat probably since I went to Purdue University and I first started college, because that's when I really started to get engaged in understanding the world in a different way. I started to take classes on like women's studies, women's history. It motivated me to take further courses in law school that taught me about the civil rights movement, law and social change. And just all of these things have helped me understand the world through multiple people's lenses in so many different ways that I have no other option but to be the person I am, because all of our destinies are tied together. And the sooner we all realize that, the sooner we can make real changes that are going to improve everybody's lives.
What is the biggest motivator for you? What is the biggest topic in your campaign?
So my number one issue right now is fighting for living wages for every single individual in Indiana. Our minimum wage at the state level has not gone up since they raised the federal minimum wage last, which I believe was in 2009 when that finally went through. And that's when minimum wage was established at $7.25 an hour. And that's where it is still today. And we are now 26 years later from 2009. I'm not great at math. I'm a lawyer, so please forgive me if my math is bad. But that is just obscene. Like, I could not, the time when I was in high school and I was making $7.25 an hour, it was still hard back then. Like, I didn't have any ability to save up any of that money. My money was going into gas because gas was like $4 something cents a gallon. It was going into, buying clothing for myself, getting food at school, things like that. So I never had any ability to save up when it was $7.25 back in my time in high school. People in this day and age certainly do not have the ability to save up their money and actually put anything away. That money is just getting straight put into living costs. And at that, it's not even enough for a single individual, not even one with a family of any sort, to sustain life on their own. You can't work for $7.25 an hour and have even a rental apartment and be able to afford to pay electricity and be able to afford to buy groceries. And people, I don't want people to be reliant on social programs just as much as anyone out there wants that. We all want people to be able to be self reliant. But the thing is, you want people to be self reliant, you have to pay them enough to be self reliant. And every job out there is a job worthy of a living wage. No person in this society can function without everybody else doing the jobs that they have found to be a good fit for themselves in society. And truly, I believe that we're in this position where people are being denied a living wage because we're allowing corporations and the wealthiest individuals in our society to get away with paying a smaller percentage of their income in taxes than the rest of us everyday workers are. We all should be paying our fair share of taxes. And when we give tax cuts to billionaires, but we cut social programs like SNAP, Medicare, and Medicaid, we're saying we're cool with subsidizing billionaires' existence. They deserve it because they had this one really good idea a while ago. That's not acceptable. We need to be putting money into society from each and every one of our pockets. Everybody should be paying their fair share back in these public service programs because we all benefit from these public services that are provided through our taxes. They provide public roadways that are kept up, they provide railroads, they provide public schools, they provide public libraries. We can't just leave it up to the wealthiest classes and corporations to find it in the goodness of their hearts to, you know what, I'm going to give a couple million back to the community of my own free will. Nobody's got to make me do it because I just care that much about people. We've been doing that for a long time already, and it's clear that they're not going to do that. They must be required to pay their fair share of taxes back into society like the rest of us are. You know, the IRS goes harder against an average worker in actually analyzing us for if we've been avoiding paying our adequate taxes than they do against any of these wealthy individuals or corporations. If we just turned onto them and ensured that they had been paying their fair share back into our tax sources here, then we would actually not need to be taxing individuals more. We would be fine with everybody just paying their fair share into the system.
So somebody put in the comments that they still make 2.25 an hour plus tips, and that tips are getting hard these days. So how do you feel about when we raise the minimum wage to doing away with this whole tip culture?
I absolutely believe we need to do away with a different minimum wage for the serving class. So I believe it was yes, it was one of my lovely followers and very kind supporters out here who's brought this to my attention before. And I remember learning about it back when I was a server too. But this individual really brought it back to my attention in this like past month or two. So have you ever heard of the NRA that's not the Gun Association?
No.
Okay, so get this. There's this association called the National Restaurants Association. They are the ones who regularly fight to keep server minimum wage at $2 and I think it's $2.13 an hour is the absolute minimum wage you could pay a server on an hourly basis. And it's because the law says, you know, as long as they make enough in tips that their hourly wage at the end of their 40-hour work week, what have you, works out to being the equivalent of $7.25 an hour, then you don't have to pay them anything extra at restaurant. They've made their minimum wage, they're good. Thing is, servers work so freaking hard. I remember being a server and oh my god, my feet felt like they were gonna fall off, my back felt like it was broken. I was freaking exhausted because I was working like over 8-hour shifts because you gotta do not only all the work of serving your tables, you entertain people in the process of serving them their food, you also are keeping up their drinks, making sure that they're plenty refilled, and then at the end of your shift, what do you get to do? Not leave, you get to clean up your area and close it out so that the next server has it all prepped and ready for them to get to work. And then they got to do the same thing. It is exhausting work. Servers deserve to be paid minimum wage, a living wage, just like the rest of society does, and they should receive tips on top of it. You know, we tip as a sign of, you know, I am grateful for this excellent service that you have provided me. So we should be giving them a living wage and they should still receive tips at the end of the day. I just think that the tips are gonna, like, we're gonna feel less guilty about not giving an over 20% tip to acknowledge really good service, if we can rest assured when we go home later, that person was already being paid a living wage, and I just was tipping as a sign of gratitude for the good service they gave me.
Yeah, I think that's a great solution. Because even if people give bad service, I still think that they deserve a living wage because everyone has bad days. And
Exactly.
it shouldn't be based on their tips to maintain a livable wage when we know that tips go down during economic hardships in general,
It's so,
which we're seeing now. I wanted to talk about classist politics. Can you
oh
explain?
yeah. Man, so it's like it underlies everything in our political system. Um, and what's really upsetting is that a lot of our current representatives, they're not even wealthy individuals that the laws that they are passing are benefiting from. They're more like, I would qualify them as maybe more like middle class individuals who are having their campaigns supported and funded by the big corporations. They're passing laws to benefit. So those corporations are help keeping them in office by donating, you know, moderately good funds to their campaigns so they can make sure to get their names out there and hold on to their seats. And they are then making exorbitant profits off of the laws that are being passed as a result. Um, it really just breaks down to every level of our society. But I think one you can look at that's pretty plain and easy to see is the Indiana School Choice Voucher Program. So, you know this program?
I hate this program.
No. I know. And the thing is, like, I genuinely do think I always want people who aren't able to afford things themselves to be able to afford things that everybody else has access to. So, like, I do think that low income families deserve to have a government sponsored program that grants them access to have the same school options that people above a certain income level have access to. But the thing is, Indiana, in this last legislative cycle of 2025 in the spring, made our school choice voucher program universal. So, what that means is whereas before we used to have an income cap on it, so it said if you make up to $150,000 as an individual, or I think it was like $250,000 as a married couple, above that limit, you don't get access to the school choice voucher program because you're already making enough money, you can afford it anyways. They removed that cap. So now everybody, regardless of their income category, is able to access the school choice voucher program. And what that does, so I will say I'm not a professional at any of this. I gather information as I go along and I learn and understand things better as I go along too. Um, I do think that's something that differentiates me from other candidates out there. I'm always open to learning because that's ultimately the way that we're going to achieve the changes that we need in our society. We need people who are open to learning and changing course when they learn new information that is important and valid. But, okay, so this is my understanding. The school choice voucher program says, hey, this money would travel with your kid to the public school system if you decide to opt into the public school system. But because you make below this certain income level, back when that applied, you can take your money from the public school system and we're going to give that to you in the form of a voucher where you can take that money and go send your kid to a private school instead. That money will go towards your kid's private school education. You got to make up the difference. So now every single family has access to that. So that means even every family that was already paying for their kids to go to private school. And now they're going to be pulling money away from our public school system and putting it into private charter schools. And a huge issue with that is that public schools are regulated by the Department of Education, they're regulated by the federal government, and they're regulated by the Indiana state government. A charter school is not, because it's a private school. So it falls outside of the scope of being governed by our federal authorities. So that means, whereas if your kid's in the public school system and they're on one of these individualized education plans because they've got some form of learning disability, if you go send them to a private school, first off, that private school, they could dismiss them for any reason at all. They could say, hey, your kid's a behavioral problem. We've had 5 behavioral issues with them in the last semester. We're tired of working with them. They might not even be working with them. And we're just cutting them. And now all that money has been burned that had been in the public school system. It's been burned on this charter school who's not going to give it back. And now your kid is outside of a school system too. And under Indiana's mandatory education laws, your kid has to be in education. So then you're going to have to go bring them back to your local public school. And that public school is going to be underfunded because you took that money away. It got burned at the charter school, and we can't bring it back with us when our kid goes back into the public school system. So really what happened when they made Indiana school choice program universal, they defunded our public school system because they made it so that every family can now choose to go pull whatever amount of money it is that a single child is calculated to contribute to the public school system away from it, go put it into a charter school that's not going to be regulated, and now our public schools are getting underfunded.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much the nail on the head right there. I do know a lot about this just being a speech language pathologist and caring about kids in general. The other thing is too that I have concerns about because it's not the fact that the voucher program exists. It's the fact that there is no cap on it and it defunds public schools. So the issue will then be is that the parents do have to make up that difference. And I think that over time, these private schools are just going to continue to raise tuition to a point that those that are in lower income families are not going to be able to afford it, which defeats the whole purpose of the program.
It does. It absolutely does. And it's just a real shame. But you know what would be a great fix to it? Electing people like me into office who are going to go in there and say, okay, we're going to repeal this legislation that made this program universal because it removed the entire purpose of having this legislation. We're going back to funding our public schools. We're going back to if you're already making over $250,000 a year, you can pay for your kids' private education by yourself. Because quite frankly, that's a lot of freaking money. That's ridiculous.
I honestly, part of me is like, I almost feel like it's a little too high, even that 250 cap, but I have not gone in a deep dive about that one.
I feel like it is too. I haven't done an extremely deep dive, but I did see that it was raised from, I think it had previously been 100,000 and 150,000 were the two caps for individual versus married family incomes. And that change happened in my opponent's first term in office, I do believe, which would have been back in, I believe it was 2022 when she was first elected. So I think it was 2022 where they first removed that cap and moved it up like another $100,000 range for everybody. And now we're where we are now, where it's completely universal. They just apparently needed to get a couple other people into office who were willing to be, have their pockets lined for their campaigns and be fine with defunding our public education institutions. And what's really frustrating about this is, you know, people want to shame low-income families for needing access to public resource programs like SNAP, Medicaid, and Medicare. There's no difference between SNAP, Medicaid, and Medicare and funding rich families' private school education. That is subsidizing the wealthy accessing private education and then completely changing the education system for everybody, meaning that low-income families are getting access to an even lower funded form of education. And like you said, they're going to be moving this private education bar further and further out of reach of low-income families. So it really is just subsidizing the lives of the wealthy and corporations at the end of the day, like we see happening far too often across the board.
I think that behind closed doors, that it's possible that this is also meant to keep people who have certain skin colors in a certain place. And I am very tired of that because with people saying that white privilege doesn't exist, it's just going to make that problem worse.
It absolutely is, for sure. There's this really good book. I have not finished reading it yet. I'm in the early stages of it, but the foreword was very insightful. It's called The Sum of Us. Have you read this book before?
I have not.
It talks all about how, if you look at legislation that's been passed since the early 2000s to present day, And this person in particular was involved in politics at the time as a form of like a legislative assistant, something of that realm. And so they literally were seeing the discussions that were being had in making decisions on what legislation to approve, what language to change, things of that nature, and saw how laws that were, they were technically going to benefit everybody in the low income bracket overall, but because it was going to, also bring up to that level African Americans, Black and brown skinned people of low income levels, because they were going to be brought up at the same time as white low income families, those bills got changed and they failed to pass because really that is the new way of racially discriminating. If we keep the low income class low and we keep them deprived of economic access like we do the higher classes, then we also get to racially discriminate at the same time still. It's the legal way to do it in their eyes. So the book, I have not gotten all the way through it yet, but it's one that I'm really prioritizing getting through because it does such an excellent job breaking down how these issues of socioeconomic class and racial identity to try and continue racial discrimination.
And there was another topic that you wanted to talk about, but it's leaving me right now. Tell me about that.
Okay, I bet it was probably why I am super pro legalization of cannabis in the state of Indiana. Does that sound familiar?
We can talk about it. I love it. Go.
All right, heck yes. We'll kind of qualify these two issues together: legalization of cannabis and criminal justice reform. So as a criminal defense lawyer, criminal justice reform is extremely important to me. There are a lot of things that we need to change on the criminal justice side of things to be a fair and just society. So number one, legalization of cannabis. It is a non-violent offense. It is a intoxication related offense, and cannabis has been shown to not be anywhere near as harmful as other intoxicants like alcohol, like any other number of drugs, honestly. And here in Indiana, we are surrounded on all four sides by states that have either fully legalized cannabis recreationally, which I believe is Illinois, Michigan, and Ohio, or they've at least legalized cannabis medicinally, which is Kentucky. And I do believe Kentucky is actually on schedule to legalize cannabis fully in this next year as well. So it's really upsetting as a criminal defense lawyer, especially one who lives in the greater tri-state area of Cincinnati, Florence, Kentucky, and Indiana here. I see a lot of people who come across the border from one of these states where it's legal, and they immediately get pulled over for a traffic violation, and then, oh, your car kind of smells like marijuana. I got to get in here and search it now because I got probable cause to believe you're violating the law. They search your car, they find the marijuana, you get charged with possession of marijuana, and now your life is a little bit worse because of it. And you bought it in a legal state. It's extremely frustrating. It's also frustrating on an economic standpoint because this money is money that could be getting spent in Indiana if we simply legalized cannabis here. I live in this rural community. I'm surrounded by farms in my community. People grow corn, they grow soybeans, they grow all kinds of produce out here in rural Indiana. I would love to give these farmers another alternative crop to grow because honestly, that is something you do have to do. You have to rotate crops through your field because certain crops will deplete the soil of certain nutrients and other crops will replenish it. So you rotate your crops on a regular basis. I would love to see cannabis legalized here fully in the state of Indiana, and I'd love to see farmers in my community get that as a crop option that they can grow out here. And then we would be able to keep that economic benefit in the state here. Like this last legislative cycle, we saw this Senate Bill 1 get passed. It cut property taxes to be, I think it was about a $200 to $250 benefit on average to the average property owner. And in return, nothing. No alternative flow of income into the government that would then be distributed down to the local government. In fact, now I need to research this a little bit better. I'm not completely sure if this was all done tied together or in previous legislation. But I know out here in Franklin County, Indiana, this Indiana state government had authorized the implementation of what is called a wheel tax through counties where they saw these property tax cuts happen, so they're getting less taxes back from the state government to fund a local government program. So they said, hey, we authorize you to implement a wheel tax, and if you don't implement a wheel tax to make up this share of the income that's going to be required for your local government to keep up things like your sewage systems, then you're not going to get that equal contribution from the state anymore. So it basically forced their hand in a way that they have to implement these real taxes to get the same funding they were supposed to get already guaranteed by the state government. So the state government is really trying to put in a lot of trouble on increased taxes at local governmental levels in this last legislative cycle. They wanted to be looked at as the good guys for giving people these property tax cuts, but they wanted to paint local governments as the bad guys at the same time by forcing them to implement local government taxes that increased everybody's tax liability overall. So that's really frustrating. So I want to see cannabis legalized so that we don't have to do away with things like this property tax that property owners are now going to be relying on. I don't want to take that away, but we do need to make sure that we're getting enough money flowing back into our state level government and flowing back into our local governments to fund all the public programs that our local governments sponsor. And the key ones that our local governments put on is public schools, public libraries, and funding of improvements to public roadways. So we really need those state taxes to get resent back out to our local governments to upkeep all those essential public programs. I saw somebody asked a question in the comments here. I think it's related to my topic.
It is. They want to know what kind of sin tax you would put on cannabis.
You know, I am not sure what a sin tax is.
So for like alcohol and cigarettes, there is a sin tax. Like basically it's bad for you and it's kind of to deter, and it's usually higher as well, and which would equal more tax revenue for Indiana. That's why everyone thinks that we should legalize cannabis.
Yeah, yeah. I'll tell you, generally, I'm not a fan of sin tax. I don't think that we should be implementing sin tax on intoxicating substances like cigarettes, alcohol, and cannabis. We should be implementing sales taxes on it. Like, I absolutely am for that. I'm not sure what amount I would say necessarily we should implement. I'd probably be looking to places like California, where it's been legalized for a long time, for what a good, respectable sales tax would be to implement on marijuana sales. But they raised taxes on cigarettes in the last legislative cycle as well, and I was actually against that personally. I don't smoke tobacco, I don't smoke marijuana, I don't drink alcohol. I'm actually a fully sober individual except for caffeine because I gotta have my coffee to survive every day. But the thing is, I know how people with substance use issues are. And raising the tax on it does not equal they are going to use it less. They're going to try. It's going to make them irritable. It's going to make the lives of everybody around them worse because they're trying to cut back on something that they relied on and were able to afford until you raise the tax on it. And it's just, it doesn't change people in the moral way that the government is trying to with these sin taxes. I don't think we should be enforcing moral codes with taxes. You know, every individual is different. If you're over the age that is legally required to use a substance, I think we just have to acknowledge that you're going to make your own choices at the end of the day. And we should try to raise good individuals in our communities who are going to encourage you to be strong, upstanding citizens and encourage you to seek out help if it seems like you're getting, too reliant on these substances. But I don't think we should be raising taxes on them as a way of trying to curb use of these substances. It just doesn't work. And let's say it's a low income family, for example, and we've raised mom's or dad's cigarette tax. So, what are they going to do? They're probably going to start looking at where they can make cuts in the ways that they're spending in other areas in their lives once they realize that it's extremely difficult to cut this thing that they are addicted to continue supplying that addiction. So I don't know. That's just me, though. I'm open to everybody's insights on that. At the end of the day, I'm a representative, and I'm here to represent the will of my people. But I think a lot of people would agree with me on this, that we shouldn't be enforcing moral standards on people through taxes.
Oh, I agree. I think that there is far too much religious moral standards put into our politics, and it needs to be removed for it to function better. What is your thoughts on like we were just in Vancouver recently, and they recently passed a law to legalize literally anything because there was such a high use of heroin specifically that people were dying in such high numbers due to fentanyl in the heroin. And they just decided we are going to legalize it so people can buy safe heroin at least and, hopefully get help for their addiction versus trying to just criminalize it.
I definitely understand the mindset that that's coming from. Um, I don't think Indiana's ready for a change like that. I don't think they are, but I think there are smaller steps that we could take to get closer to the same goal, because we do have substance abuse crises here in Indiana. What I'm seeing most often is there's a crisis going on right now with methamphetamine and with fentanyl and with cocaine and substances of those families. There's also issues with this intoxicant out there that is called spice. That's one that we see come up a lot where people are not allowed to smoke marijuana. They're not allowed to, obviously use any of these other illegal intoxicants. So they smoke this thing called spice, which actually gets you way more messed up than any of these other drugs. It makes you like zombified in the mind and in your kind of functionality. It is actually Raid bug spray sprayed on green leafy substance, any green leafy substance, and they just, toss it till it's dry, and that's what people are buying and smoking, and it's really melting their brains. So we have some serious substance issues here. But I think what people really need access to in Indiana that everybody would be okay with approving and putting a stamp of approval on would be legalizing test strips, because I do believe Indiana law currently looks at test strips as a form of paraphernalia. So if you have test strips that could test for presence of fentanyl in another intoxicating substance, it's seen paraphernalia because it's related to trying to identify one intoxicating substance from another that are both illegal to have. But if people could legally have those and use those, that would actually be a huge lifesaver because people, if they're in this addiction, they're going to be seeking out the substance anyways. I'd rather them have the power to identify when it has something that could kill them in it immediately than to not. So I think legalizing test strips and making sure that they aren't considered paraphernalia and a whole separate criminal charge of its own in this day and age would be a great step forward in that direction that Indiana residents could agree on.
Yeah, no, I didn't even know that was illegal. That's crazy to me because it's not even the substance. Do you think that Indiana as a whole just needs more education about substance abuse? Because I feel like a lot of people just think it's a choice and that you can just decide to stop and it's not that easy.
I think a lot of people, if they've grown up or they've lived their life with people close to them who they knew before they got engaged with substances and then they knew during their substance abuse issues, it really does change people's perception of that person because they've only seen them change significantly and they can't understand why they wouldn't want to pull out of it. I will tell you from my legal standpoint, just talking to people who have had these issues, most everybody who's experiencing a substance abuse issue has either experienced some form of trauma in their childhood, they've experienced some forms of significant trauma in their adulthood, be it in the form of being unable to access housing at a reasonable rate, being unable to access mental health treatment, all kinds of things. People are using substances to self-medicate for actual mental health issues because it's so expensive to get on health insurance. And we just saw our health insurance programs that are funded by the state government for people of low income economic class get cut significantly. And Indiana actually put the pedal to the metal on implementing those tax cuts from the federal government this year. So people are going to be seeing those significant cuts coming through much more quickly than people in other states. And that's really what's at the root of these substance abuse problems is people are not being humanized. If we aren't paying people living wages for doing 40 hours of work a week, like an actual human being, um, every person who is working 40 hours a week deserves to be able to pay living costs and afford to live on their own and support their family if they have one. So I think a lot of this dehumanization of our current political structure, our current societal structure, has a lot to do with substance abuse issues. I I don't know that educating people on the diverse ways that people get into substance abuse is going to cure it. But what I do think is going to address it is raising living wages, is properly funding Medicare and Medicaid programs. So just making sure those who are in the lowest income brackets are actually fully provided for. That's going to be a significant way to help address the substance abuse crisis, because people are happier when they're provided for. They're not struggling with as many mental health issues, or, they're not feeling as sad, at least, and trying to cope by abusing substances instead. So I really think changing our priorities, stopping subsidizing the lives of the wealthy and of corporations in the state of Indiana and across the country, and instead actually putting that money, which we're going to be paying the same amount of taxes anyway, right? Making sure that our taxes are actually going into funding the lives and the care for our fellow citizens that we want it to, instead of making sure the billionaire gets another yacht on the year. That's really what's going to adequately address these issues.
I know that when Australia implemented universal health care, it was right before they had that large massacre and then banned all guns. Poverty was already trending down, like who were in poverty, and the crime rate was already trending down because people were able to pull themselves out of poverty, and they saw a lot less gun violence automatically. So I think that it might be a better way to mitigate some of this. So I like that. What are your thoughts on Gaza?
Oh my God. It breaks my heart. So I I really struggle to talk when I'm talking about Gaza because the emotions start to come forward for me. And as somebody who has a 2.5-year-old, I literally saw a child of a family that I've been following from Gaza starve to death. Over the course that I've been following this family's Instagram page, from earlier this year in the spring to present, I saw this infant who had other health issues, but who literally died of starvation because our country is funding the bombs that are being dropped on Gaza. Our country is funding everything to help uphold this genocide that is happening to the Palestinian people. Because of that, this infant died of completely preventable issues. And I just saw an article earlier today that went into the real numbers of how many people we have lost, how many Palestinian people have been needlessly killed in the course of this genocide so far. If we honestly evaluate the number of people who have starved to death, the people who have died from not receiving the medical care they need, the number of journalists who have died, the number of everybody overall who's died because of this ongoing genocide, that number is at about 668,000 people right now. And what's despicable is at least a third of that, if not more, a third of that is infants, children between the ages of newborn and less than a year old. And above that, the next biggest group of people who have been killed is 2-year-olds to young adults. And beyond that, the next group that's the next largest group who's been killed so far is women. The smallest group who's been killed so far is actually young men and adult men. And it is absolutely heartbreaking. I mean, I genuinely have gone through periods where I cry a lot and really easily because of all the horrendous violence that we're seeing there and the feeling of helplessness here in the US, because we've been calling, right? We've been calling for months and months and asking our representatives at every level to do something, to stand against our tax money being sent to help assist this genocide. We've seen military members burn themselves alive in protest of this. We've seen individuals that the newspapers and government refuse to name burn themselves alive in protest of this because they don't want to lend any more fuel to the fire that is burning in the hearts of the American people to end the genocide on the Palestinian people. And it's just absolutely abhorrent. So I'm very against the ongoing genocide of the Palestinian people. And, I think truly the only way that we can stop this genocide from going any further is we must remove our standing federal governmental officials from power. And I'm not even talking about one political party or the other. We've seen it upheld by both political parties, and that feels like the utmost betrayal. I should be able to trust that people aligned with the party that I'm running with at the state level are going to represent the values that I do here at the state level, at the federal level, and right now they don't. And I want to see them out of office because supporting a genocide is not an American value.
I agree, and I'm happy to hear you say that, obviously. That's why I wanted to ask about it, because it is an important topic for a lot of us on the left, and it seems to be growing, that more and more people are caring more about it and being aware of it. But it is so hard to dig into Gaza very much. I have to do it in short spurts because it is just so horrendously awful that there's no words for it.
It is. It is. And honestly, this is like only the teeniest, tiniest funny. I held a vigil here in Batesville, Indiana, my small town. I don't know if you recall, but it was about a month, maybe 2 months ago. I think it was in June. They announced that I think it was 15,000 to 16,000 children were expected to die from lack of access to adequate nutrition and food. And so I held a vigil here in my town that night. And I was so lucky. This really amazing young woman drove all the way out here from about an hour away to be present at this vigil with me, who I had met at a rural protest out in Brookville, Indiana, that we had put on about a month earlier. But it was just the three of us out there, and I called my local law enforcement ahead of time, and I was like, hey, I'm going to be standing out in a parking lot with a candle as a vigil for the Palestinian children that are about to die. I just wanted to give you guys a heads up so that you guys don't think anybody's like casting spells or anything out here. It's just me, and I'm holding a vigil for the Palestinian children. So that was the only part that was teeny tiny bit funny, but it was extremely, extremely heartbreaking. We just spent the time talking about the horrible acts that are happening on the Palestinian people and just state sanctioned violence overall. It's a horrible thing to see, but it is happening here and abroad.
Needs to stop. It needed to stop a long time ago. And I think the thing that is baffling to me is how anyone can justify the amount of death that has been caused by this genocide because it was started by Hamas. It's like, how many deaths do they need to make it equal at this point is my question, because it's gone so far and above just making things even, if you will. So I just don't understand how people can support it. We are starting to run out of time. So I wanted to see if there was anything that you wanted to say, talk about before we close things out that we didn't get to yet.
Oh, goodness. Oh, man. Oh, there's so many things, but I just like, my brain goes a million different directions. Oh, okay. I could go back to my criminal justice issues a little bit here. So, like I was saying earlier, legalization of cannabis is not my only goal in criminal justice reform. So we have some other very glaring mars on our state and federal constitutions. And we have some serious issues within our own state laws that lead to substance abuse issues being overly penalized and not well treated with rehabilitative goals. So first, the glaring mars on our state and federal constitutions. So the 13th Amendment. Everybody knows the 13th Amendment, right? Because that's the amendment that was passed, and it said it is illegal to have people enslaved. That's why we all recognize that title. 13th Amendment also has the biggest mar in it on our overall Constitution. It says, yes, slavery is illegalized across all of the United States of America, but if a person is convicted of a crime first, then it's actually legal to still force them into indentured servitude. And so that is why people who are in prisons and jails are able to be forced to work for free or extremely low wages compared to what our actual federally and state mandated minimum wages are, is because of this glaring mar on our 13th Amendment. So to change the 13th Amendment or even anything in the state constitution, you would have to either get a majority vote in both the House of Congress and the federal Senate before a constitutional amendment could be passed. And at the state level, you would have to get a majority vote in those same chambers. And if you wanted to override the federal Congress, you would have to get the majority vote of the state and Senate houses across all 50 states to pass a constitutional amendment. So it's going to take deep, hard work, but honestly, I really do think that that is something we could get the majority of states on board with if we cannot change enough seats in our federal legislature to get it done the easier way of just having the federal House and Senate pass such a change. But that's something that absolutely needs to be changed. It is a black mar on all of our names to have any form of slavery still considered legal in this country that loves to call itself the land of the free, the home of the brave. We're not very free if we still have a contingency that allows for slavery. And then another thing. So here in Indiana and in many states, they have this law that's an enhancement. It's called a habitual offender enhancement. So let's say you're charged with Class A misdemeanor, possession of marijuana. You've got a minimum sentence and you've got a maximum sentence. For a Class A misdemeanor, the minimum sentence is 0 days, $0 fine. Maximum sentence is 365 days, and the worst maximum they could give you is all 365 of those days being done in jail. With the habitual offender enhancement, it says if somebody has previously been convicted of a level 6 felony or above on 3 different occasions over the last 10 years, you can then seek to add, above and beyond that maximum sentence, a minimum of 3 years and a maximum of 6 years. So this means that people who would otherwise be facing up to 2.5 years at a maximum could then end up facing up to 5.5 years at a maximum. And it's problematic for people with substance abuse issues because that is who you most often see facing these habitual offender enhancements when it comes to the nonviolent enforcement provision. Because people who have substance abuse issues tend to stack up level 6 felonies because possession of cocaine, possession of methamphetamine, possession of a controlled substance, these all tend to fall under the level 6 felony classification. And so they pick those up over 3 different occasions over a 10-year period, then they can be thrown into prison for at least 5.5 years. And it really causes a lot of problems because there's no cure for throwing people in prison. That doesn't cure the substance abuse issue. So I really want to get in and talk to my fellow legislators, and I want to work on this habitual offender enhancement because it does make sense to apply it to somebody who has a violent history and they have a history of picking up multiple violent offenses. I can completely understand why we want to tell those people, well, because you've not made the proper efforts to change who you are as a person, we're going to stack some extra time on your next sentence because you keep doing the same violent things over and over again. But when it comes to nonviolent offenders with a clear history of substance abuse related offenses, we should not just be throwing them in prison for 5.5 years. It just plays into the same issue of, we've got the law that says they can be forced into indentured servitude for those 5.5 years. And then we also are just putting their substance abuse issue on pause and they may just pick it right up again when they get out of prison. So we got to do some deep work for criminal justice reform in our state here in Indiana and across the board for our country.
Well, I think you're a fantastic candidate. I think that you would do great things if you win, and I hope you do. So if anyone here is not already following her, please follow her and donate to her campaign if you can. She is on Act Blue, and tell the website again because I don't want to mess it up.
You're the best. It is votevictoriamartz.org.
Great. So please go and follow her. Check out her webpage. Follow her on Instagram. Are you on any other social media?
I am. I am on Instagram and TikTok as Martz4. Oh my goodness.
Indiana.
Yeah, there we go. Oh, it's right here. What do you know? My name's right in front of me. I am also on Facebook, and we are on Threads with the same username, and I think we're on Blue Sky too. I have a social media person who handles a lot of my social media managing for me, so I think it's the same username on there as well.
I think it is too. If you look up Victoria Martz or Victoria Martz for Indiana, usually it comes up. So go and follow her. And like I said, please donate if you can, because these candidates always need money to get through the finish line. And make sure you're sharing anything of hers and reposting, commenting, because that helps her get more traction, get more views, so more people in Indiana can see it. So, Victoria, thank you so much for joining me, and it was great getting to know you, and I look forward to seeing all the great things you do in the future.
Thank you so much. One last thing I forgot to say, I am a grassroots candidate, so this means I refuse donations from anybody who's a corporation, anyone who's not an individual like you, me, or Brianna here. So your donations, whether it's a small $5 one or similar amounts, it all means a lot to me because all those donations together are really what are going to help move this campaign forward. But thank you so much, Brianna, for having me on this afternoon. It was so good to talk to you, and I'm excited to have more conversations with you in the future, both off and online.